Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
In the midst of Pennsylvania's Amish country, on a peaceful summer night in 2008, the body of 45-year-old Jan Roseboro was found at the bottom of her backyard pool. Her husband, Michael, a successful businessman and a member of a prominent family, showed no emotion as he learned of her death. But the next day, an autopsy revealed Jan had been savagely beaten and strangled before being tossed in the water to drown. Soon, Michael's secret lover, pregnant with his child, stepped into the media spotlight, and a horrifying true story of illicit passion, deadly deceit, and cold-blooded murder unfolded. Love Her to Death is the book we are going to be speaking about tonight with my special guest, investigative journalist and author, M. William Phelps. Thank you very much for agreeing to this program, and welcome to the program, M. William Phelps.
Hey, Dan, how are you? Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Why don't you set the tone for this here? We spoke of Pennsylvania's Amish country in a place called Denver, Pennsylvania. Tell us a little bit about the community and the kinds of people that live in this community.
Well, when we talk small town, and it's kind of a cliche almost to talk small town nowadays where everybody knows everybody, Denver is essentially a small town. And surrounding Denver, you have Mennonites, you have the Amish, and, there's probably, 4,000, 5,000 people in this community, but it seems like a lot less because it's so rural, it's so hilly, it's so spread out. And it's just quintessential Amish country, green landscapes, cows, horses, corn. I mean, there are sections of this town I'm driving through with one of the police officers, and I was there during right before they were chopping all the corn, and literally you're driving around in a tunnel of corn. You can't see you can't see the roads anywhere but where you're driving, and it's really eerie a little bit and really strange. And so I think the point I'm trying to make is for a murder to take place in a town like this is not only rare. I mean, I think the only other murder that took place in town that these cops investigated was 20 years before, and they had solved that, I think, that day or something. So this was very, very strange and very rare for this community.
Now, one of the main characters of this story, of course, is Jan Roseboro and Michael Roseboro. Maybe you can tell us first about Jan Roseboro and how she met Michael, and tell us a little bit about Jan Roseboro, her family, her upbringing, where she grew up. Tell us a little bit about Jan Roseboro, please.
Well, I mean, they all grew up right in that Pennsylvania area there. Maybe not in Denver, but certainly in and around that area. And Jan came from a pretty well-to-do family of bankers. Her father was, as I describe in the book a little bit, was that James Stewart character in It's a Wonderful Life who,
right.
If you didn't have the collateral or if you didn't have really the credit, he gave you the loan because he knew you and he trusted you, and he was that banker. And later on in life, when the kids grew up, Jan, her sister's brother, he sold the bank to a big corporate bank, and so they had some money, sure. And Jan, but Jan didn't grow up in a family that flaunted it or that showed off the wealth that the family had.
Right.
She didn't indulge herself in all kinds of luxuries. I mean, she had money, so she had things in life like anybody, and she was just when she married Mike Roseboro, who was again another a person who came from a well-to-do family. Michael Roseboro's family had been in a mortuary undertaking business, burying people for over a century. I mean, his great-great-grandfather, his great-grand-grandfather, and then Michael took over the company. And it was a one-man operation, basically. They had some help, but it was, I got a hold of the financial records, and they were making, they were bringing in over $1 million a year in that little town, burying people, and so you had basically, if I hasten to say it, but like a power couple in this little community,
right.
This would be it. I mean, but by no means did they flaunt it. Mike did later, but not early on. And they were just two people who fell in love, came from similar backgrounds as far as financial, etc., and education-wise, both went to college, etc., and they fell in love and started having kids. And Jan, and this is where Jan's true character started to shine. She loved being a mother. She loved taking care of those kids. It was her vocation. She was at every swim meet, every Little League game, soccer game, and she took those kids around, and Mike worked, and there was nothing wrong with that.
Sure. Now, what was Michael Roseboro's upbringing? You talk about that he had a wealthy family, and they were in the funeral home business, and then he inherited that mantle and went on to be a successful operator of this funeral home, Roseboro Funeral Home. So tell us about his upbringing and whether there's any siblings. Tell us a little bit about his early life and what was he really like according to the people that knew him best.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to lots of people about Michael Roseboro, and they all said the same thing, that he was that jock guy, he was that Mr. Popular guy who, for many girls in high school, basically was unapproachable and that sort of thing, but deep down he was a shy guy, and thought he was Mr. It, et cetera. And his whole life he worked at a funeral home. I mean, that was his life. He was groomed from high school to take over the business. And one of the quotes in the book talks about, he was mortified by death. He said he hated death, but yet it became his life. So he learned to accept it. And he said, the best part of my job is sitting with families in their time of need and being compassionate to them. And I found this to be one of the most bizarre, strange, stunning parts of this for me, that I talked to couple after couple, person after person, who said Mike came into my home to pick up my father or my son or whomever had died, and he was the most compassionate, caring person. He made me feel like I didn't have a worry in the world. He was going to take care of everything. He picked up the body, put it in, in a body bag, took it out, and prepared it. And he took care of everything. So he did end up embracing his job, and really, really understanding what it took to be a good undertaker.
Now, what was their Roseboro marriage characterized by? Was from everybody that knew, from the kids, what was it, from all appearances, what was their marriage like?
Well, the marriage went through, a series of ups and downs, if you will. I mean, it started out strong, obviously. They had 4 kids, one after another, a couple years in between maybe, while he built up the business. And I should say, he built up the business while he built up the house. I mean, they ended up taking a little house that Jan was raised in, and where she lived as a child. And Mike and Jan built this into just like an estate, really. They just kept adding on and adding on and adding on to this thing until it was like the shape of an L-shaped, sprawl, And the marriage was, loving from all indications. I mean, all the relatives, people, friends that I spoke to, said, Mike and Jan loved each other. I mean, they weren't arm in arm and, constantly embracing all the time, but, they did enjoy each other's company when it was a party or something. But then, later on, I start to talk to some of their close friends. Later on, it becomes apparent that Mike is sort of a womanizer. He's sort of a player. He's sort of a flirt. He likes to flirt, if there's a barbecue, if there's a party. He always wants to be the bartender. He always wants to be the one who's feeding the ladies the drinks and laughing with them and joking with them. And this becomes utterly apparent to lots of people that Mike is perhaps, stepping out on Jan. And then it gets into the grits of the rumor gossip mill in town, and it starts churning, and people start to talk, Mike's seen here, Mike's seen there, Mike's with this one, Mike's with that one.
Okay. Now, how much does Jan know about his infidelities? As far as you could tell.
She told a couple of people that she believed Mike was stepping out on her. She caught him once. She from the phone bill. She caught him once going, because Jan used to take care of the phone bill, so his cell phone bill or something came in, and there's all these numbers on it, and she approaches him. And someone in the family, and I didn't say who in the book, but someone in the family, Jan was talking about it one day, and someone on Mike's side of the family says to her, look, that's the Roseboro male way. You suck it up and you move on. You do your duty as his wife and his mother and the mother of those kids, and you suck it up, because that's the Roseboro way. That's what you do. And, Jan wasn't that type, she wasn't that type, although she did stay in the marriage, I should say.
Right. Now, the fateful day is in July 2008, but before that, I thought very interesting, Michael Roseboro decides, and I guess along with the family, decides to construct something in the backyard. What does he build sometime well before July 2008 for his wife and himself and in their backyard?
Well, he builds this beautiful in-ground pool with, stellar landscaping and all the additions and anything you could imagine, and tiki torch lamps that are not the kind you buy at, the local grocery store. These are ones that are implanted in the ground and fed by natural gas, and there's stone and beautiful trees, and there's this beautiful pool that's lit up at night. And I start to talk to the neighbors around the house, and they're telling me, this place was lit up every night, and there was a party out there, not necessarily a drinking party, but a party with the family or someone every single night that summer after that addition was finished. And they just really lived out there for that summer of 2008, the first year that they had the pool. And it brought them together in many ways. The kids, Jan, Mike. And the one thing that everybody said that I talked to, which becomes significant later, as you read the book, is
right.
that backyard was lit up like a football field every single night.
Sure.
And I think what's significant to me is the testimony that I got from the firemen. There's a firehouse like diagonally from their house, maybe 200 or 300 yards away from the house. And these firemen would say every time we went on a call, we would take a look over there because we like to look at Jan because she was a looker. And she'd be in her bikini or whatever, and she'd be out by the pool, and they would remember this. This was something they remembered because there'd always be lights on outside.
Right. Yeah, it's very significant. Now, what was happening in Michael Roseboro's life at that time? Didn't have any financial problems, it looks like. You said you're making a fair amount of money and it was a one-man operation. But what is going on in Michael Roseboro's life, unbeknownst to his wife Jan and his family, and maybe a lot of his friends even?
He's making a fortune. I mean, he's not making a fair amount. He's making a fortune. He's bringing home, paper. I mean, serious paper. And not much overhead for him, So what happens is, he starts to get an eye for this woman who lives across the street from the funeral home. She starts walking by the funeral home, walking one of her kids. They eye each other. He sees her at a local town fair. They eye each other. He finds out where she goes for coffee every morning up the street. He starts going there. They bump into each other. They start talking, and one thing leads to another, and next thing you know, they're sharing, 100, 150 emails and texts a day. And Michael Roseboro quickly becomes obsessed with this woman.
Now, you said that this woman lives right down the street or across the street from the funeral home, and the funeral home is
downtown Denver.
Downtown Denver. Now, how does he go about? You say there's emails. So what? First off, let's hear what is very quickly the content of those emails. Is this a sexual relationship? Is he upfront about his marriage? What does he have to say about his marriage? What's the tone of this relationship?
I mean, he really doesn't have to say that he's married because everybody in town knows that he's married. I mean, he's Michael Roseboro. In fact, the woman who he had this eye out for had been eyeing him before he even presented himself to her and asked her out on a lunch date. I mean, she said, "I've been eyeing you for a long time. I mean, I think you're attractive." She told one of her girlfriends, "I'm going to marry that guy someday." That's what she told one of her girlfriends. And here she is, married herself with kids. She knew Michael Roseboro was married. He didn't keep it a secret. They're in this small little town. She lives directly across the street from, when I say down the street, I'm talking you walk out the back door of the funeral home and you look to the right and boom, there's her house. In fact, she lived right next door to Michael Roseboro's parents, who ran the funeral home before him. So this is that small of a town. And these emails become heated immediately. The sexual energy between these two just is enormous, and it starts building and building and building until he cannot take it anymore. He's got to get her somewhere alone where he can make love to her or have sex with her. And I go through the emails, I go through the relationship. I don't belabor it in the book, but I go through it in detail to show the build-up, the build-up to all of this.
Now, you talked about they had to find a place to profess their love and where to. It's incredible. Where do they decide, at least sometimes, to have sexual relations?
Well, one time they had sexual relations right in the funeral home while he was preparing a body. I mean, and the paragraph I'll never forget this paragraph. I think about it often in the book that I wrote, and I can only think that the person who is at home grieving, right? The person at home who had hired Michael Roseboro to take care of their dead son, dead daughter, whatever. They're at home crying, getting ready for this funeral. He is in there banging his mistress who lives across the street. And this guy presented himself as this classy businessman, So he's living this double life, But then Angie, his mistress, is in charge of cleaning apartments and preparing apartments for a family apartment building, almost an hour away. So they start to rendezvous in that empty apartment, any empty apartment they can find after that. And then, they even go to a monastery, a parking lot, a park. I mean, anywhere they can, basically, inside the car, the SUV. It becomes an obsession for him. I mean, he just has to have this woman all the time.
Now, there is other talk besides just the sexual passion that they have for each other, because they do talk about the relationship and how serious they believe the relationship is. So tell us, which I thought was fascinating as well, mixed in with all that sexual tension and energy is also this other conversation.
Yeah, and we're not we're talking here, Dan. We're talking about, as you know, we're talking about a period of from May 30th to May 16th, May 30th to middle of June. Okay, we're talking about a couple of weeks here where he starts talking about marriage already. She starts talking about marriage. They both start emailing each other about, we found the love of our lives. We're going to get married. They start planning the wedding. He starts picking out gowns. He starts picking out places to They're going to get married on the beach. All their kids are going to be there. They start talking about all of this life they're going to build together, and he never once mentions this one anomaly in all of this. There's one anomaly in all of this, at least for him, we're talking about, and that is what? That's his wife, whom at the time he is what? He's going home telling his wife, I'm taking you to North Carolina. We're going to renew our wedding vows for our 25th wedding anniversary this coming summer. So he's playing both sides of the coin now. He's telling Angie, his mistress, he loves her, he wants to marry her. He's telling his wife, I'm taking you and 20 of our friends to North Carolina, to the Outer Banks, to renew our vows. So this is a narcissist. I mean, if you study these things, I've written now 20 books about, murders, and this type of murder is the classic textbook case narcissist, who believes, A, no one's ever going to catch me, B, I'm smarter than everybody else, and C, I can get out of this anytime I want to. I'm Michael Roseboro.
Yeah, it's incredible. Now, to add to this incredible mix and this confluence and unsustainable non-reality that this guy is going through, all these delusions that he can maintain this, what does his mistress tell him, inform him, which makes the story go in a particularly different direction suddenly?
Well, yeah, there's a big shocker here. I mean, there's a surprise here. All of a sudden, she becomes pregnant. The mistress becomes pregnant. The worst case scenario that could happen for them happens. And I heard such varying stories about this, that she trapped them, that she says the condom fell off. I mean, there's all kinds of different stories about this. So we don't know the facts, because she wouldn't talk to me. She had no trouble talking to CBS 48 hours, going on camera and crying, but she would not speak to me. But let me tell you, I spoke to some people in her family, and I spoke to some close people to her. And as you know from that book, I got in deep with her life. And also, there was a lot of documents that were never released that I got my hands on. So she becomes pregnant, and the pressure's on. I mean, the pressure is on. He needs to, everything's coming to a head here. He needs to do something about the wife, or she needs to do something about the wife. One of the two of them do, because she's prepared. She is prepared to walk into her house at any day and tell her husband, get out. I'm divorcing you. I'm marrying him. She's got no trouble doing that, you see? And Mike, for some reason, because he's a narcissist, cannot do that. One of the motivations here that they talked about during the trial, which I don't necessarily know if I believe it, if I agree with it or not, was the financials. If he divorced Jan, he'd have to give her half of everything. He'd have to pay her alimony, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he was with her 25 years. She deserves, every penny of that.
Right.
And one of the motivations the DA, and God bless him, I mean, that's his job, argued was, Mike didn't want to do that, didn't want to share his wealth. So he chose, murder instead of sharing his wealth. But yeah, I mean, this is textbook narcissism.
It also presents a problem for the good reputation of this person. Like you say, this family that's owned a funeral home for 100 years, and you're in pretty deep religion country here. I mean, this is some serious religious people in around that area.
And the mistress, we should say, comes from a Mennonite background.
Sure.
I mean, she has family ingrained in the Mennonite community. She practiced the Mennonite culture herself at one time. So this is how close it is. I mean, she wasn't a Mennonite, quote unquote, when he met her, but as close as you could get without being one.
Sure. Now, on the day in question, what was happening just previous to that involving the Mike Texter, a friend of Sam, the Jan and Mike's oldest son. What were they doing previous to that? And it's very important later on in the story. So tell us about that day in question, and then the evening where the two friends, Sam and his friend, are backyard speaking with the parents. Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, yeah, and that's why there's a build-up in the book, the day before Jan was murdered, the day of Jan's murder, 2 hours. That's why there's this thumping metronome of how this is all building up, because it's so important to talk about what happens that whole day. Mike and his mistress take off on a rendezvous, and they end up in that apartment building most of the afternoon, having sex and having lunch and talking about when they're going to get married and talking about the beach and white horses and white gowns and how beautiful her hair is going to look, and and they're talking about all of these things. And Jan, meanwhile, goes into the bank, makes a few deposits here and there, does a couple of things, runs into a friend in the bank, talks to the friend. This is all caught on, bank surveillance. And then Jan goes home, and then Mike goes home, and the whole family gathers at the pool for a while, and dinner time comes, and they're still all at the pool for a little while, and then things get a little bit rough with what happens. People start leaving, kids start going to sleep. Mike's son and his friends show up and see Jan and Mike in the pool together, and then Jan ends up in the bottom of the pool a couple hours later, dead. And we have some very significant pieces of evidence that come to light in the coming days after that.
Yeah, it's interesting that Michael's demeanor at that time when he called 911. Maybe you can just tell us what his call was to police and what his demeanor was like, and how the story slowly unravels to reveal the truth. Tell us where it starts with his call to 911.
Well, yeah, I mean, he calls 911 and he comes out of the house. He calls 911. Well, backtrack. He comes out of the house, he claims. He comes out of the house, and he says all the lights are on out on in the backyard. The tiki torches are on, and he said he fell asleep. He left Jan out in the pool area. She was reading or watching the stars or whatever, and he left her there, and he went to bed with the kids, and all of a sudden he gets up to go to the bathroom. He sees the lights are all on, and he goes out there to shut the lights off because it's very rare that she would leave the lights on, and he looks in the pool, and boom, there she is. So he claims that he jumps in the pool, grabs her, pulls her to the surface. She's in the deep end of the pool. He dives in, swims down, picks up this body, drags her to the side, pulls her out of the pool, and calls 911 and says, "I think my wife just drowned." He doesn't say, oh my God, I found my wife in the body, I don't know what's wrong. He doesn't say, he says, hello, I think my wife's just drowned. And from there, the 911 call gets more interesting after every line that he says. And I would encourage your listeners to go online and just Google, Michael Roseboro 911 call and listen to it. It's online all over the place. And listen to that call in the context of, the story as it unfolds in the book. And the call is very telling to police when they hear it later. And Mike's demeanor, as you mentioned, he's very stoic. He's very calm. He's very nonchalant. I mean, it's like, my wife drowned, Can you help me?
Yeah.
So red flags start going up all over the place.
Right. Now, I understand that you've got to go right now, or can you hang around for a few minutes?
I can give you a couple more minutes, and then I have to run. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was an hour. I thought it was a half hour. I was told by my publicist.
Well, you just let me know when you got to go. We'll ask you another question just to get people a little bit more abreast of this fascinating story. Now, how long does it initially the police believe that this may be just a routine drowning. They have no, obviously this Michael Roseboro has no criminal record, so there's no initial suspicion. But what happens soon after, and what do police conclude as a result of we'll say the medical examiner's examination of the body? Tell us what the police soon conclude and where the investigation is headed towards.
It really starts with the ambulance ride to the hospital, because the paramedics take her, Jan, and there's no blood or nothing anywhere. I mean, it's just her and Mike, and she looks like maybe she drowned. I mean, they cannot, a paramedic cannot call her dead at the scene. A doctor has to do that. So for all intents and purposes, she's still alive at the scene. They're pumping her. There's no response, but so they put her into the ambulance, all right? And Mike doesn't go with her, number one, in the ambulance. Number two, he doesn't even get in his own vehicle and drive to the hospital. In fact, no one in the whole entire family ends up at the hospital but Jan, by herself and the cops and some medics. Nobody.
Incredible.
Now, on the way to the hospital, medics are working on her in the back of the ambulance. And they're pumping her chest, and they're giving her CPR. What happens, what that does is, it gets the heart working again. She may be dead, but the heart's still pumping, right? And what does the heart do? It pumps blood. Well, they start pumping her heart, and blood starts spurting out basically the back of her head. Because she has this big mane of blonde hair, no one could see anything before. Blood starts coming out of the back of her head, and she got this huge gash in the back of her head. Well, now we got a different scenario now. The autopsy comes, they do the autopsy, they peel her scalp back, okay? They peel it back just like a rubber mass, and the detective is right there, and I talked to him about it. He's like, I knew right there that she had been beaten savagely, because you could see these white spots under her scalp, and that's an indication of trauma. And sure enough, I mean, the autopsy proves that she had been severely beaten, strangled, and she had froth. She had water in her lungs. So that means that a lot of this happened in the water, and that she drowned to death. Really, she would have, she was beaten, but she drowned to death. And there's no blood around. There's no blood anywhere in the house, outside, anywhere. And who better a person? And I think I'll end it here. Who better of a person to clean up blood than what? An undertaker.
Sure.
So the cops, the detectives, and the detective that really investigated the case had never investigated a murder in his whole career.
Right.
They begin asking questions, and Mike just tells this same story over and over again. And remember, they don't know about Angie yet. They don't know about the mistress. He doesn't tell them about the mistress, but that comes out later. And, it's interesting how it all unfolds from there.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you very much, Matthew, for a very interesting interview. We could go on for a long time, and I'm hoping you're going to come back when you're not so busy and grace us with your presence again on our show. And great book. And I want people to know that they've been listening to M. William Phelps with his book, Lover to Death.
We didn't even get to my show. That's why I'm so busy. I'm right in the middle right now of production. I'm filming a series that I created for Investigation Discovery, which will air probably end of this year or beginning of next year.
What's the title for that?
Well, the working title is Hunting Justice, but we'll be changing that. It's me chasing down unsolved serial killer cases with a couple of major twists in there that we're keeping close to the vest at this point. But with a television show, you don't just get in front of a camera and start talking. There's so much work that goes on pre-production and even before the film starts rolling. That is just enormous.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that, because I know that you this is in your blood. You're a serial killer expert. You've done so much investigative work writing these books, and I look forward to a true to life. I mean, there's so much fiction that everybody seems to be enamored, but it's really coming from the even more horrific and gruesome and surprising true crime. And so I congratulate you on this program. Even before it comes out, I look forward to watching it, and it's great to have you doing something like this. I think it's very important and could really advance the true crime genre to where, you know, it's former status, and I think people are going to be looking at true stories much more seriously in the future.
Well, hey, thanks, Dan. And, you know, I'll keep you up to date, and when I can announce some stuff and come back on when I'm done with the filming, I'll be glad to.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Come back on and talk about the program and talk about any new work that you're doing, so that'd be great.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Have a good night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good evening. Good evening, caller. Do you have any question you might want to ask? Well, I guess not. Anyway, what I wanted to discuss with our audience this evening is some upcoming books that I'm going to be showcasing in the very near future, especially next week. Next week's show is Michael Benson, and Michael Benson is the author or co-author of 50 books, including the pinnacle true crime books Betrayal in Blood and Hooked Up for Murder and Lethal Embrace with Robert Mladenich. As well, he's the author of Inside Secret Societies, Who's Who in the JFK Assassination, and The Complete Idiot's Guide to NASA, National Security, the CIA, Submarines, and Modern China. His other works include presidential biographies and true crime books for young readers. The book that's to be featured next week is Burn Farm by Michael Benson. And in this tale, Sheila Labar liked to troll the personal ads in homeless shelters, looking for men whom society had rejected for one reason or another. Men she could easily dominate both verbally and sexually. One by one, she invited them to her remote New Hampshire farmhouse, where she engaged them in S&M. But over time, sex gave way to brutal acts of torture, as she mercilessly flogged and beat her captives until they confessed to committing unspeakable acts. Once satisfied that they had paid for their sins, Sheila savagely slaughtered them and burned their remains on her farm. From the disturbing audio tapes Sheila made of her victims' confessions to her own bizarre statements in which she claimed to have returned from the dead to be God's avenger, The Burn Farm takes you behind the scenes of the scandal that rocked a quiet New England town and into the twisted, depraved mind of a manipulative, cold-blooded murderer. That's Burn Farm with Michael Benson next week. I'm really looking forward to that. It is one heck of a story, Burn Farm. After that, we have a number of guests that haven't been on the program as of yet. In the near future, we will be having an author named Ronald J. Watkins with his book Against Her Will. And this is talking about Richard and Victoria Tinges feared the worst when their 13-year-old daughter Kellyanne vanished from their quiet suburban community of Valley Stream, New York, on March 3, 1989. The nightmare to come was worse than they could ever imagine. Only 5 doors away, in the home of John and Elizabeth Golub, police found Kellyanne's body stuffed in a plastic garbage bag. She'd been brutally beaten, stabbed, strangled, and mutilated. After weeks of intense investigation, police arrested the Golub's 21-year-old son, Robert, a reclusive young man obsessed with bodybuilding and given to fits of rage. The sensational trial and subsequent conviction of Robert Golub shocked the nation and tore the once peaceful community apart. Neighbors took sides, so did the media, and no one who lived on Horton Road would ever be the same. This is acclaimed journalist Roger J. Watkins. He takes you into the dark heart of an idyllic American suburb where the savage murder of a young girl shattered the innocence of a town forever. And he's another pinnacle author. After that, we have a person named Wensley Clarkson, and this person also goes by the pen name John Bellini, spelled Jon. John Bellini, and this book is called Child's Prey: The Rampage That Shocked the Nation. One Raging Teen Killer, 10 Innocent Victims. On 8 a.m. on Wednesday, October 1st, 1997, nerdy, overweight outcast Luke Woodham, 16, entered his Pearl, Mississippi high school to settle some scores. Armed with a .30-30 hunting rifle, he opened fire and then calmly walked out of the school door, leaving two teenage girls dead and another 7 students seriously wounded. Police soon discovered that Woodham's 11-minute rampage had actually begun hours before at home, where they found his mother, Mary Ann, brutally beaten with a baseball bat and then stabbed to death. Luke Woodham may have been the assassin, but behind his horrifying act lay the shadowy hand of a twisted mastermind. Grant Boyette, 18, Bible student turned Hitler lover and devil worshipper, was a diabolical Pied Piper who used a fantasy role-playing game to program 6 high school students with hate, Satanism, and animal torture. Those were the chilling words of Luke Woodham. Murder is gutsy and daring. Now he is serving 3 consecutive life sentences. The horror he unleashed serves as a disturbing reminder of today's shocking epidemic of high school shootings, and that the one place America's kids are supposed to be safe has become the most dangerous place of all. That's Child's Prey with John Bellini. That's the end of this month. One Raging Teen Killer, 10 Innocent Victims, the rampage that shocked the nation. After that, we are going to have discuss a book called King of the Godfathers by Anthony M. DeStefano. This was previously published as The Last Godfather. This is another pinnacle title, The Deadliest Mafia Dawn of Them All, King of the Godfathers, Big Joey Massino, and the Fall of the Bonanno Crime Family. So it's something I normally don't do, but I'm going to be doing a lot more of. I've read a lot of true crime books involving organized crime, and I want to get some of these storytellers on the program, because some of these books are just fascinating when you get the real story, not so much the Hollywood story of how these people really lived, and the true and horrific stories behind some of these, not so much serial killers, but definitely mass murderers. So that's going to be Anthony M. DeStefano and the King of the Godfathers. For more than 20 years, Joseph Big Joey Massino ran what was called the largest criminal network in the U.S., employing over 250 made men and untold numbers of associates. The Bonanno family was responsible for over 30 murders, even killing a dozen of its own members to enforce discipline and settle scores. He would be brought down by Salvatore, good-looking Sal, Vitale, the underboss, who was not only Massino's closest and most trusted friend, but also his brother-in-law. In the end, facing the death penalty and the prospect of leaving his family penniless, Massino started talking to the FBI, the first mafia godfather to break the sacred code of Omerta, and the end of a centuries-old tradition. This book is written by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Anthony M. DeStefano, who interviewed Massino's family and friends, as well as law enforcement officials and confidential sources. King of the Godfathers is the story of the brutal mob war that made Massino head of the Bonanno family and the most powerful gangster in America. Another author that we'll be dealing with in the near future, I'm hoping, is Aphrodite Jones, a New York Times best-selling author, very familiar. Most people reading true crime are familiar with Aphrodite Jones. This is a book called Cruel Sacrifice from a few years ago, Teen Girls, Mean Girls, Killer Girls. Cruel Sacrifice by Aphrodite Jones. We've had a guest named Burl Bear on, and he ended up being one of the encore programs because he's such a great interview. Burl Bear, with his Edgar Award winner, he's an Edgar Award winner, and his book that we would be discussing in the near future is Fatal Beauty. She was a rodeo star, a seductress, and a killer. And it's Fatal Beauty by Edgar Award winner Burl Bear. We should have him on in the next 8 weeks or so. After that, I got a particularly interesting book from Pinnacle as well. It's called The Measure of Madness, Inside the Disturbed and Disturbing Criminal Mind by Cheryl Parody, and it's got a foreword by the very famous Catherine Ramsland. So this is The Measure of Madness, Inside the Disturbed and Disturbing Criminal Mind. A forensic psychologist reveals the dark and troubling human mind. The Measure of Madness. So I'm having a little bit of a hard time getting hold of her just because the website does not lead me to be able to leave a message for her, but by hook or by crook I'll be able to get a hold of her through Pinnacle, and we'll have an interview with Cheryl Parody very soon. After that, we have another author named Ron Francel that a lot of people might be familiar with, and his latest book, Delivered from Evil. And Delivered from Evil is accounts from survivors of mass murder who have lived to tell the story. So it's written from a little different perspective, and it'll be very interesting to talk to Ron Francel. He is the author of quite a few true crime books. One of the most popular is called The Darkest Night by Ron Francel. So tune in April, I think it's April 13th, for Ron Francel as we discuss his book, Delivered from Evil. Sounds very interesting. We have Kevin Sullivan is going to come back on the show and talk about his book, Bundy Murders. We had him on very early on in the show last year, but I found that not enough people had a chance to listen to the interview, and because Bundy is one of the, if not, one of the most fascinating serial killers and most fascinating deviant human minds that the world has ever known, I think it deserves to have Kevin come back on and talk about the Bundy murders again, because it's a fascinating book and Bundy is a fascinating case. For all those people that think they know about Ted Bundy, there have been a few books. Of course, the classic Stranger Beside Me by Ann Rule, written by the person that worked and was friends with Ted Bundy. So it's an incredible story that she was that close to one of the worst killers on the face of the earth. Kevin Sullivan has a different approach and has uncovered some information that wasn't found maybe 30 years ago, and has done some more investigative work, and obviously presents a different perspective to the Bundy story. But of course, the crimes that Bundy committed are obviously included and spoken about in his book as well. But Ted Bundy deserves as many programs as anybody would want to talk about, because he's such a fascinating an example of the criminal mind. For those that have been looking at the show page and wondering when and where is the Terry Sullivan interview, the John Wayne Gacy story, the killer clown, I apologize for even if I'm misleading people about having Terry Sullivan on. It's just that the interview was scheduled, then postponed, then rescheduled, and it's just Terry has a very busy law practice, and he's a practicing lawyer and owns his business, and so his time is very precious, and had to a couple times reschedule or cancel at the last minute. But I promise you and I assure you that Terry's very interested in coming on the program and discussing Killer Clown. The book, I think, that is just a true crime classic, and that everyone should go out and read this book, Killer Clown. It's just an incredible book, one of my, if not my favorite true crime book of all time, Killer Clown, John Wayne Gacy, by the prosecutor and the author of the definitive story about John Wayne Gacy, Killer Clown. So anyway, we will have Terry Sullivan, the prosecutor of John Wayne Gacy, on the program at some point in the near future, I promise you. And it'll be one heck of a program, and do not miss it. Absolutely not. Now, we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to also say that I want to thank everyone that's listening to me sometimes stumble through some things and some rough beginnings, but I want to thank the people that routinely and regularly, and even people that have just come on to listening to the show in the last little while. I want to thank you all for listening, because the program now has turned into a bona fide hit with about 35,000 people listening and downloading programs each and every month since around October. We had about 25,000 in October. So now we're up to about 35,000, and always per month growing with a few new people, more people following the program, and more people contacting me and commenting on the programs themselves. Feel free to contact me, too, about any books that you have read and you found fascinating that I might not know about. I certainly try to keep up, but there are so many great stories by great authors that I haven't heard about. Keep in mind, though, I would want to know about any story that you thought was really, really good and warranted being on the program, but lots of the authors would like to come on and talk about their latest release. So especially if you read something that's fairly new and you really are moved by that book, please contact me. I will take the word of and a good explanation on why this program I should discuss this book on my program. I will do the necessary research to see if it fits in, which any really good book about murder will certainly qualify for this program. So please give me your ideas and suggestions, and I'll be more than happy to check those out and see what we can do on getting some of those authors that you find really fascinating to come on the program and talk about their works. So I appreciate, again, everybody's participation in making this show a hit, and that is why we're getting the caliber of, this program is getting the caliber of authors that we are getting. Ron Francel, we just had listened to M. William Phelps, and as you noticed, he didn't realize, he said that the program was an hour. He's going to come on again and talk about his program, his television program, where my prediction, I think, has come true. I've been talking for a couple of years that the only thing left in television is the true story. And there's so many fascinating authors with so many incredible stories that the amount of plots and stories that they could do in a well-done true crime formatted show, if people are interested in fiction, and all the fiction really comes from nonfiction, from some of these stories, I think that the next thing that viewers will be really interested in is true crime stories brought to television and brought to film. So I really applaud M. William Phelps, Matthew, for his work, because he's really a successful true crime author. He's a great writer. I think with his book, he's pushing the boundaries of having a running commentary throughout the book is unusual. I think it's good to break whatever rules you feel are necessary to break in this genre, just making sure that you're bringing to the public interesting stories and well-written, and that's what we get a lot of. True crime fans are constantly looking for the next fascinating story, and by virtue of these remorseless psychopathic killers and the crazy stories and circumstances that we live in, we're getting these fascinating stories month after month and year after year. And there are many, many people lining up, good writers, to write these stories, to chronicle these tales, and to have these stories told and known throughout the world, as they surely should be. So, again, I want to thank you very much for listening to the program, and I want you to tune in next week for Michael Benson with his book, Burn Farm. And after that, we will have Ronald J. Watkins with Against Her Will, and we will have King of the Godfathers by Anthony M. DeStefano, and we will have Ron Francel with Delivered from Evil. And so in the next 6 weeks, please tune in and listen to the programs, and any comments and any suggestions are absolutely well received and welcome. So I want to bid everybody a good evening, and thank you very much for listening. And join me next week for True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Have a good evening. Good night.